because it's not an easy thing to talk about some of these things that we're going to talk about. So thank you for being so open and willing to just tell us your story.
And it sounds silly saying it now, but I didn't realize how traumatic a lot of the things in my life had been. Look, I've been sexually abused, which obviously I know that's a traumatic event, but it was also the way that I was raised is you don't really talk.
Hey, what's up? Thanks for being here. Welcome to MultiformPTSD, where we talk about non-military related post-traumatic stress, complex PTSD, abuse recovery, and mental wellness in general. So glad you're here. I am Tracy Lowry. I am so glad to be here. So let's just go ahead and get started. Let's do it.
And I am here with Maria.
Hello.
Hello. I'm so glad you're here. I actually had the pleasure of being on your podcast.
I'm excited for when that airs. Yeah.
Me too. But I'm so glad that you decided to flip around and come on here too. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here.
Oh,
well, like I told you before, just ask away, because I've made a habit of not keeping anything kind of to myself anymore, and I've found a lot of healing just by talking about a lot of things. So
I hear you. So we talk about PTSD here, obviously. However, as we were talking about before, I don't like necessarily hanging on to PTSD as far as that term, because I feel like we need the diagnosis. We need to know what the problem is in order to solve it and move forward. However,
absolutely,
I don't want to hang on to it. And I mean, people will say, my PTSD, and because of my PTSD, I do this. And although some of those things can be very true, I feel like we need to kind of step out of that and move forward from it. We needed the diagnosis so we can have a care plan, but then it's time to move forward. And so what I love is, as we were talking, you've got a lot of different areas of what I would call, traumatic events or tragedies or things that you've had to kind of work through. And so I'm so excited that you're willing to do that, because it's not an easy thing to talk about some of these things that we're going to talk about. So thank you for being so open and willing to just tell us your story. So
absolutely,
let's go ahead and talk about some of those, I guess, tragedies or traumatic events that kind of made you realize that you had some things to work through, and how that process went for you.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's kind of funny, not funny, haha, but just kind of funny, surprising that, I didn't realize, and it sounds silly saying it now, but I didn't realize how traumatic a lot of the things in my life had been. Obviously I knew they weren't fun, and a lot of them were, look, I've been sexually abused, which obviously I know that's a traumatic event, but it was also the way that I was raised, is you don't really talk about a lot of things. I was raised in a very private minded family, and when things happened, it was very much expected that, we privately deal with it, and then we just kind of move on, which is not inherently bad all the time. You don't want to stay in one place and dwell in one place, but you do need to be able to feel that you're allowed to, more in the situation, or, feel the situation. And, as a kid, I actually have had more than one, sexual abuse experience, I guess you would say. And, as a kid, I knew it wasn't normal, but I also didn't realize, again, how traumatic it was and how it was actually shaping just how I made decisions. All of the ways that I made decisions.
Yes.
So, the first time that I was sexually abused, I was 15. And, I was old enough to know what was going on. I was old enough to know that it was wrong. I was old enough to know that I didn't want it to happen. I wasn't old enough to say, no, please don't. I was old enough for all of those things. And, they were able to still do it anyway. And so, for the longest time, it made me feel that my voice didn't matter, that, I wasn't able to stop it from happening. I can remember going and telling, my mom, what had occurred. And again, very private family. It was pretty much a hush-hush situation where we just didn't talk about it, didn't say anything about it. It was swept under the rug.
Right.
And, I guess as a kid, I didn't think about it then, but I guess as a kid, being told that we just don't talk about it also made me feel more ashamed, because it was like, not only did I also feel violated, I felt like something was taken from me, because I had never been sexually active before at that time. I felt like something was taken from me. I felt just dirty. I just felt dirty. And then to have, my mom, tell me that we just don't need to talk about it. We don't need to talk about this. This is not something we want to get out, because we don't want people to be talking about this. And I was just like, okay, which just made me feel more ashamed, which again, we talked about this before I went on air. I don't blame my mom. I was mad at first when all this first kind of came to light in my own mind as an adult dealing with it. I was kind of angry, like how, I can remember thinking, how can you just tell your daughter, that we're just not going to talk about this, how can you try to, to make her feel that way? But as I've healed more, I've realized I grew up in a very poor family, like super poor, like super, super poor. And my dad had recently just got a job about that time, a few years before that, where he was actually making enough money that we could actually afford food all the time, which is a big deal, So I can remember a mom saying, "I'm afraid your dad will lose his job." So I think she was afraid he was going to do something and end up losing his job. I was the oldest of 4 kids, and I think she didn't work. I think she was just terrified for what would happen to the whole family. And again, I'm a parent, I'm a mom, and yes, I would hope that I would be able to, take action and do all these things. But again, I haven't been exactly in my mom's footprints of being afraid that we'd lose our home, not be able to eat again, and go back to that situation, potentially lose us all. I mean, who even knows? So, I've come to a place of healing that I can say, yeah, it definitely hurt, a little bit more when that happened, but I don't necessarily blame her any longer. I'm not angry at her for all that any longer. I think that, she was trying to do what at that moment, what she felt was the best for the family. And I've made my own mistakes as a parent, and, I'm sure my kids will end up talking about me too. So, I mean, it's just kind of one of those things that I just chalked it up to, in retrospect, would she change it? Maybe, maybe not. It doesn't even matter at this point, but I've been able to give her grace on that, to say, yeah, it kind of made me feel worse at the time, but I don't think she was doing it to be a terrible mom or a terrible person. So, I do think, thinking about those things and trying to come through my own healing through those things has made me think a little more about, things that have gone on with my own kids even, and, things that I've said to my own kids. I think we can get so caught up in just adulting. We use that term adulting all the time.
Yeah.
I think we could get so caught up in adulting sometimes that we forget. It may not be something as traumatic as, sexual abuse or something like that, but it could just be something that's a big deal to them. It's going on in school or that whatever. And I think sometimes we can minimalize what they're going through accidentally because we're so caught up in our own junk. And I know I've been guilty of that. So that's, just kind of thinking those things through and being able to pull those things apart, has kind of allowed me to actually to heal. I mean, it really has, because, it's allowed me to extend that grace and come from a place of understanding to say, okay, well, yeah, I wish maybe she had said something different. And, I wish I had known to think about things different, but neither of us did. So, what it's already is done, as they say. And so at this point, I can only make decisions from this point on, to better my life and to better my relationships, and to try to, allow that to teach me lessons on how to handle other people. And I'm not always good at it either. Even being, a person that's gone through lots of things, we get caught up in our own junk a lot of times, and then we react. And sometimes we don't realize how our words, or maybe lack of words, can be causing pain and damage in people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you bring up a very valid point. I've had multiple traumatic events, I guess, and of very different variety. And we can get so caught up in, poor me, why did this happen to me? Why do I have to deal with all of these things? And it's when I finally came to grips with my healing that I needed to just heal and work through it, and then I could use it to help others. And because of that, I can help more people because I've had a range of experiences where at one time, and I could still go there if I allow myself, but to go to, victim mode. But now, like you said, as we heal, you can kind of see, okay, this can help me with raising my son and helping others and family, and really trying to work on how the words I use or don't use, or how to react to certain things. And sometimes I feel like we feel like we should have all the answers. And like you said, I still make mistakes. I don't always know the right thing to do or say in certain situations, even if I have been there, because we're all at different stages. So I would like to, if you're willing, talk a little bit about the sexual abuse. And you don't have to go necessarily into the details if you don't want to, but really how it generally, if it was someone you knew, didn't know, that kind of thing. You don't have to give names or give too much information, and how that changed, like you said, how you made decisions, your future relationships with whether it be loved ones or not loved ones. How did that shape you? Can you kind of talk, like, because I am a sexual abuse victim as well, or survivor, or thriver, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So what would you say to someone who maybe isn't at the healing stage that you are to help get there? Kind of talk to me like that.
Well, like I mentioned earlier, there's been 3 separate sexual abuse instances that occurred from 3 separate different people. The first time that it ever happened, I was 15, and I went to a party, which I was not allowed to go to. My parents were strict, and I was not allowed to go to parties.
Right.
So, as teenagers do, they lie to their parents, and, I made up that I was going to my girlfriend's house, and really we was going to another girlfriend's house whose parents vacationed often, and she was just there with her and her older brother, and everybody's having a party, 15 years old. I had never had a taste of alcohol in my entire life, and I can remember, they had alcohol there, and I can remember taking one sip of beer and like, oh my gosh, that is nasty. So I actually went to the bathroom, and I didn't want to look like the dork, but I went to the bathroom and dumped out all the alcohol, and I went into the fridge and I got some soda and poured it in there instead, because I was sitting there thinking, I want to be walking around with a beer can, because I don't want to look like the person that's too good, because, all the names that you get called as a teenager. I remember a few times I would get called goody two shoes, and I never wanted to do anything back because I was so afraid to get in trouble. I was so afraid I was going to get in trouble. And so, I was like, I'm not going to be goody two shoes. I'm going to walk around my beer can. They won't know. But beer was so nasty, I didn't actually want to drink it. So I had soda in there and I'm sipping on it.
I love it.
Well, 15 years old, you don't realize the potentials of dangers of different things. And of course, I've got my drink laying around and not even thinking about it because everybody's at a party and we're dancing. And I only remember bits and pieces of that night, honestly. But I can remember, picking it up. I remember the soda kind of tasted strange, but I was just like, oh, this is nasty. I thought it was because it still had, some of the beer in there. I honestly did. So I just drank it. I wasn't thinking anything about it. But I remember everything just like the room started to spin. Like the room started spinning. I was like, gosh, I just feel really, really weird. I just started feeling really warm. I could feel really warm. And I just remember thinking, why do I feel so dizzy? And then I don't remember anything until I can remember I'm laying in a bed, and I don't even know which room I was in, but I'm laying in a bed. And I look up and I seen a guy that I went to school with, and we had grown up together. And I remember kept saying, no, please don't. No, please don't. Please don't. And I can remember saying, please don't. No, please don't. Please don't. I had never been sexually active before at that point. And I just remember, kind of coming in and out, and I just felt like I couldn't move. I felt like my whole body weighed 1,000 pounds and I couldn't actually move it. But I can remember waking up and just saying those things. And then I can remember waking up, the next morning, and I didn't really know what to do because I was afraid to tell my mom because I wasn't even supposed to be there anyway.
Right.
I was afraid all my friends would think I had done something with him. I had a boyfriend at the time that wasn't there. And I was afraid that he'd think something. And so I tried to hide it, and I went to school that next day and didn't say anything. And I ended up just completely breaking down. And I remember they took me to the office, and they thought, because I had a busted lip and I had a busted place on my eye, and I still don't even know what happened or how that even happened. But I really wouldn't say what happened because I was too afraid to say it. So they automatically assumed it was abuse at home, as they called in social services to the school.
No.
So that's kind of started the spiral.
Yeah.
So, they called in my parents, and, I was too afraid to say what had happened, of course, but I also didn't want my parents getting in trouble for something they didn't do. So I finally just kind of had to blurt it out, and if you've been through sexual abuse, the whole, and I'm 15, so the whole
Right.
process after that is almost worse than the experience itself, because you go to
Absolutely.
the hospital, you just feel extra dirty. They put you through the rape kit test, and so they're plucking out hairs and all kinds of exams, and it's just very humiliating.
Mm-hmm.
And not only was I humiliated anyway, but my parents are there, so I'm more humiliated, and then they know that I lied to them and all kinds of stuff. And
Right.
in the process, of course, high school, people start talking, there's a lot of people
Right.
a lot of people saying, I think she did it on purpose, and I think she's just lying because she don't want her boyfriend to know. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to go to school. I can remember after all that was done, I went home, and they approved for me to do some homeschooling for a short amount of time. I just didn't want to go back to school because I didn't want to face him. He was a
Right.
minor, and um, it was a very surreal, awful situation that, my boyfriend didn't know what to believe. So we actually ended up splitting up. So I lost my boyfriend. I felt isolated from my friends at school. There was a few of them that believed me. And there was actually one of my friends that came forward and said he had walked in during it, and he noticed that I looked like I was asleep. And, he apologized to me a long time later, saying that he should have said something. But, at that time, again, we were all kids. We didn't know. I mean, he knew enough to know it seemed odd that I looked like I was asleep, but he didn't
Right.
know enough to say anything, and, it's just,
Right.
it was kind of one of those things that I feel like all the stuff around the situation was almost more harming than the
Yeah.
situation itself, because, I
Right.
just felt like my entire life got pulled away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I during that time, I kind of developed this, I don't even know what the word would be for it, but I didn't trust anybody anymore. I'll be honest. I didn't trust anybody. I didn't want to be really good friends with anybody anymore, because friends betray
Right.
you and they don't believe you. And I, was really weird about having boyfriends. And if I did, I wanted to kind of control the situation and not really actually get too involved with anything or anyone anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a problem with just any type of emotional connections, because at that point, a lot of this people that had hurt me were people that were close to me. So, it kind of created this mistrust in me that I didn't even realize was there until, many, 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 many years later. I just kind of become numb to it, honestly. And even I know some people that I've talked to that have been through sexual abuses, they never wanted to have sex again. They never wanted, whatever. And it kind of almost did the opposite for me. It was just kind of like, whatever, I don't even care anymore.
Right.
And my next boyfriend that I had, I mean, I ended up having sex with him, pretty soon into the relationship, because I was just like, I don't even care anymore. Because I felt like
Mm-hmm.
that choice had already been taken from me.
Right.
So it didn't even matter anymore. I felt like I was just a piece of property. I know it sounds silly,
Right.
but people could take what they wanted at any point in time. So at least if I was saying yes, then it wasn't being taken from me. And to me,
Right.
that was a way of taking back the control. If I said yes instead of saying no, then it couldn't be forced upon me, because, the force and the taking of it was so much more scary to me than just me going ahead and giving it away.
Right.
So I ended up sleeping with that boyfriend, and, but I ended up developing, which I didn't even know this term until, actually about a year and a half ago, codependency issues. So
Right.
I ended up latching onto him, just latching onto him. And I would do anything and everything just to keep him happy. I just
Mm-hmm.
wanted him to stay happy.
Yeah.
Well, we were together for, the rest of my high school career, and he was 2 years older than me. He ended up going to college and ended up meeting some girl at college, of course, and I was still in high school. So he ended up, dumping me for this college girl, and my whole world fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
My whole world fell apart. And, it ended up being, right after that, I feel like I actually fell off a cliff more than I did when the sexual abuse happened. Like, I wasn't great after that, but I fell off a cliff more because instead of really dealing with my healing, I just latched onto him and I was almost using him as a source of happiness. As long as I had him happy and he was in my life, I was completely fine. And I didn't realize that I was establishing those habits for myself, even at that age. And when he left, I just didn't even, again, I went back to not even caring anymore. I didn't care anymore about what happened to me or what went on. I quit really caring about how well I did at things, which was not me. I usually wanted to be the best at everything. And I ended up, going and hanging out with some of the people that I wasn't allowed to hang out with, that, was sitting around drinking all the time, and just hung out with them. And I ended up being again in a place that I was not supposed to be, and ended up at a gas station and ended up getting attacked and raped at the gas station and it was again, it's weird. Looking back, even though it should have been way more traumatic than the first time, because I did remember all this, and I did get like hit and like slammed against a brick wall, and all this stuff. I guess I was already so damaged by that point. I kind of was able to tuck inside of myself and go inside of this, I guess, like this hole inside of myself, and
disassociate.
Yes, I was almost, it sounds silly to say this, but it was almost less traumatic than the first time. But it did create, again, this pattern of me withdrawing into a hole when I couldn't deal with something. And, when, this happened, I didn't even want to deal with it. And I'd already kind of come to the terms that, well, we just don't deal with anything anyway. So I didn't report it. I didn't whatever. I ended up having a friend that came and picked me up because I was in not good shape, and, kind of cleaning myself up and just dealing with it myself, because I had come to the conclusion that we just deal with it ourselves. I just need to deal with it myself, which is obviously not a good thing.
Right.
And during that time, it wasn't that much longer later, just months later, that it was actually a friend of my mom's, her husband. He didn't end up raping me, but he did end up, he just kept, sticking his hand on my bathing suit bottoms, and my parents would be pretty close. So he was just like blurring the lines and trying to do more and more and more stuff. And I did tell my mom about that, but it was, it was one of those reactions again. We can't tell dad because dad will lose his job. That was the reaction again. So we didn't tell dad, and I just stayed away from him, and it was just, it was just one of those things that again kept telling me that, I couldn't trust anybody. I was just there to be used, and I just needed to learn how to deal with stuff myself. I ended up like getting out of high school. I actually left high school after my junior year. I didn't go to my senior year, and I got my GED. Because by that point, honestly, I didn't want to be around anybody anymore. Like, I didn't want real friends anymore. I didn't want to be around any of the people, because I felt like people could see my damage, and it was just almost easier. Again, I established this pattern of tucking in a hole by myself and just running away from the situation, and I did. And I moved to Ohio, because this was in Tennessee. I grew up in Tennessee, moved to Ohio, actually moved in with my grandparents. I got my GED. I ended up meeting a guy where I was working at. And again, the codependency issues latched onto him, became sexually active with him pretty soon into the relationship, because, wanted to keep him happy. Didn't want him to leave me,
Right.
And I ended up getting pregnant. And, I was 17 because I had got my GED, I should have been actually my senior year, but I'd already got my GED. So I was just working at that time. 17 years old. I'm pregnant, not married, came from a Southern Baptist family. So I had to drop that, news onto my grandparents, which about killed them. And then to my mom. And, it was just kind of one of those things that I remember being how terrified I was, that I was pregnant, but I was honestly, I was more terrified of the fact that he was going to leave me than I was about the fact that all of a sudden I was going to have this like baby. You know, I was more terrified about that. And, you know, we actually did end up splitting up whenever I was about 6 months pregnant. So when she was born, he was not there. But whenever she was about 6 months old, we ended up getting back together. We ended up getting married, and we actually ended up having 3 more kids together. So we have a total of 4 together. But our relationship wasn't the best. And it wasn't, I can remember when we got divorced thinking it was just him. Just like, it was just him. It was him. You know, he wasn't, you know, responsible enough. I mean, we were babies when we got married, first of all. He was the same age as me. He wasn't responsible. They didn't know, you know, how to be married. He didn't know what a relationship was. And he didn't know, you know, what I needed. But honestly, I didn't know what I needed. And it took, when I was going through counseling for, you know, a bunch of stuff about 1.5 years ago, it was then that I actually realized how much of it was actually me, you know, and not all of it was him. Because I had, you know, I never really formed a real intimate relationship with him, you know, and I'm not talking about intimate sex. I mean, we had sex obviously because we have 4 kids, but I mean, there was no intimacy there because I didn't know how to do that. You know, I could go in my hole and I could, you know, lay there and do, you know, whatever he needed me to do because again, I was property. I could, and I focused on the kids and all my affection went to the kids. I could love my kids. But I had a real problem actually. It's not that I didn't love him and care about him. I did, but I had a real problem actually being intimate because I didn't know how to do that. That part had just been kind of damaged. And, you know, we ended up getting divorced and I felt like a failure. And, you know, but 6 months later, I was married again because codependency issues. I did not know how to be alone. It was instantly like I felt like I was worthless unless I had somebody there to make me happy, you know? And 6 months later, I was married again. And obviously in 6 months, you don't know anybody. And not only did I not really know him, but it was a ready-made family. He had no kids and I was coming with 4 kids. So it was like ready-made family. You know, and there was and I ended up pregnant right away. I'm about as fertile as I come. Ended up pregnant right away. You know, our first month married, I got pregnant and we ended up having a baby, and he ended up being on the spectrum. You know, it's funny because, you know, I never asked a lot of questions about his past or his life. I knew he had been in the military. You know, I knew, you know, he had been through a lot of things in the military. He was in special ops and, you know, some not good stuff that went down. And I noticed some stuff I remember about him early on in our marriage that I didn't like. I didn't like it was almost like, he knows this now. We almost ended up let me fast forward a tiny bit. We almost ended up divorced. When I had my breakdown, complete meltdown and was in therapy, it was mainly because my marriage with him was falling apart. A lot of stuff with my business was falling apart, and it was all just coming to a head. And I just broke down, and every single thing that I'd ever been through in my entire life just come to a head at that moment. We did end up working our marriage out, which was a miracle because it had got to the point of being very, 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 very bad. But that's not the normal. And I always tell people that when we talk about that we did save our marriage, that is not the normal. And the only reason we were able to save it is because he was willing to do the work. He was willing to change because I had got to a point that I did not feel safe in our marriage. Like I did not feel safe in our marriage. But let me go back to that again. Like I didn't ask a lot of the questions, and I didn't, like, you hear these like red flags and warning lights. There was a lot with him. He was, on one hand, he was the sweetest, most caring person that you would ever meet. But then like at the flip of a switch, he could just turn, and I was actually scared of him. Like I was terrified. Like at that point, it's not like he never did anything to me at that point or anything, but just the way that he looked through his eyes sometimes, the way that he would just get so angry, the way that, you know, just stuff would set him off. It didn't make sense to me. It does now because again, military, and he has been diagnosed with PTSD from all that stuff. You know, he would just fly off the handles, and I would just be terrified. And I can remember early in our marriage, having this thought, that I'm going to end up on the news. I'm going to end up one of those women on the news where, you know, she just gets like murdered in the middle of the night because I just seen that there was just something not right. But again, I had already been divorced once. I had 4 kids. I'm remarried, you know, at this point I'm pregnant again. And it's like, okay, what do I do? I felt completely trapped, completely stuck. How do I go to my family and say I'm getting divorced again? How do I go to my family and say I've yet failed at something again? And so I didn't. So I just kept my mouth shut and never told anybody any of that stuff, and just tried to keep him happy. I felt like because we've been married for 12 years, and I felt like oh no, my goodness, I don't even know. The first half of our marriage, at least, I was majorly walking on eggshells. I just tried to keep everything perfect for him. That way there would be nothing that would even upset him at all, because it's not that he raised his hand to me or anything at that point, but he would be so upset and so mad, and I just couldn't deal with it, that I didn't deal with it, so it just became easier to placate it.
Yep.
But I didn't realize, again, that I was establishing my boundaries. I was establishing what I was willing to put up with. And, people that knew me, they would have never guessed that from me at all, because it's really funny. I said that he almost had these two sides. I actually had these two sides too. I had the part of me in the real world where I actually, for the most part, if I was doing something, within my career or whatever, I was very self-assured, very independent, I seemed very extroverted. But in reality, I always say I'm an extroverted introvert, because I'm very introverted. When I have to be extroverted, I recluse. I always had anxiety. I would always overthink everything. I would lay at night awake thinking, I shouldn't have said that. Why did I say that? I sound like an idiot, all those things.
Yes.
And, I was almost ashamed to admit that I had this other side, that I was just trying to smooth things over all the time. And I was trying to keep everything okay for the kids, because I'd already failed them. I ended up divorced from their dad. I was trying to keep everything okay for him. And then, like I said, our first child together was on the spectrum, and that was his own just brand of stress, and I love him to death. I wouldn't change having him, but it just was another layer added to my already very fragile, stressful life. So, it ended up being that it took all of that. And then I had decided, because of my son, to start freelancing. I left my career. I was a personal trainer for years, and I'm a nutritionist. I still am, technically. And I ended up getting into marketing when I got divorced, the first time in 2008, and because I needed to make more money. And, I've done that since then. So I've had these kind of two worlds. Well, I was working for other people in the marketing side of things up until, my son came along in 2009. And then about 2012, it became very hard to work for somebody else, because, with autism, you never know what child you're getting that day, one day he would be okay and be able to, go to a babysitter or go to grandma's or go somewhere, and the next day it's not happening, it's not happening. So that became very hard. So I decided to freelance, and I got so busy with freelancing that I decided to kind of strike out and do my own company, which was kind of a good and a bad thing. I've always been very goal oriented. So I really enjoyed the idea of being able to create something and watch it grow and watch it actually do well. But that also became kind of my safety net from hiding from my personal life.
Yep.
And I didn't realize it at the time. I did not realize this at the time. But so I created this business, and it was actually going pretty well. 2018, we decided to get a commercial building in our area, and start renovating it, because I needed an office, because it was very hard to work from home. I have 7 kids now. So after the one with autism, I'm 2 younger than him. So being able to, some days it's like, woo. But being able to work from home was practically impossible. So we ended up getting this building and started renovation on it. It was an old bank and sat empty for years. It was quite, the undertaking. And again, more stress, adding more stress and more stress and more stress without even realizing what I'm doing to myself. So, excuse me. But, I think we'd end up doing that a lot of times, and we don't realize it until it all kind of comes crashing down. But so I get this building, and right after I signed to be able to purchase this building, my grandma gets diagnosed with a brain tumor. So these are the grandparents that I went and lived with when everything happened. They've always been my people, you always have your people. I mean, I love my parents. Don't get me wrong. I love my parents with all my heart, but my grandparents they didn't have to do the parenting things. So they got to just listen to me whine and complain and, would give me whatever I wanted. You know what I mean? So those were my people. So she got diagnosed with a brain tumor, and she went downhill like really fast. So she got diagnosed in January of 2017 and late January. And then or 2018, and then she was gone by April of 2018, so just in a few months. And during that time, my grandpa, he had emphysema for years, and I really think he was mourning himself to death, and he also ended up passing during that time. So he actually passed before her. So he ended up passing in February. She passed away 6 weeks later. And then my great-grandma, who was his mom, which I was also very close to, they actually lived together, passed 2 weeks after that. So I went from, doing pretty good in business, getting this building, thinking everything was, going to be okay because I had this to focus on. I felt like I could be successful at this. I was holding this as kind of my thing. My personal life was a hot mess, but, I could do this okay. To having those three people that I loved so much, losing them so quickly, it started a downward spiral for me that I didn't deal with it. I actually didn't even cry at first. I couldn't cry because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to stop. And I remember actually telling my husband, he said, I'm really sorry about this and, all that kind of stuff. But I told him, I said, I just can't deal with this right now. I just can't deal with this right now. Because if I do deal with this right now, I'm just going to not want to get out of bed. And so I just stuffed it away like I did lots of other things. And I just didn't want to talk about it. I technically went to the funerals, but I stood all the way in the back near the road and just barely stayed for a few minutes and left. I just didn't want to deal with it. It was something that I just couldn't deal with, and I had to just push it out of my head because I could feel something was brewing that wasn't good, and I just couldn't put my fingers on what it was. But not dealing with it, I think, was actually what ended up causing it to be so bad later, honestly, because I just stuffed it away and I focused on work and I focused on just what I needed to do with the kids. And then I would focus on work. And, I had this balance of just pushing into work and pushing into work and pushing into work because, we had taken on all this debt with the building and, that made me have to get this done in my mind and have to just push hard. And, you hear this grind and hustle and and I was grinding and I was hustling and I was dealing with the stuff with the kids, during this time. My husband and I handle stress differently. I know this now through going counseling, but I didn't realize it at the time. Even though we both have PTSD, we actually, the way we handle stress makes each other worse. I recluse inside of myself and I don't want to deal with it. And he wants to talk it out and deal with it right then. And I can't. So during this time, he's starting to feel stressed too, because he's working full time. He's a lineman, working full time, doing 10 to 12 hour shifts, coming and working on this building because it's a hot mess and we're going into more and more debt as the days go by.
Right.
And then going back and doing it over and over and over. So he is working nonstop. I'm working nonstop. We are kind of like strangers in the night, as they say, and we're just not dealing with any of the stress. Right. He keeps trying to talk to me about it. And I'm saying, I can't deal with this right now. I just can't deal with this right now, and he, in his mind, the way that his PTSD kind of, reared its head was he thought that I didn't want to be married to him anymore. He thought that there was somebody else. Right. He thought because he worked a blue collar job and I was dealing with a lot of these white collar people in suits and, driving fancy cars that I must want to be with them. And this started this downward spiral of him getting extremely jealous. And it ended up being that, I would have to go to these meetings because I'm trying to get accounts and he would be blowing my phone up and I'm hitting end because stop blowing my phone up. So he's automatically thinking I'm definitely doing something then. So it just become this back and forth, right? Yeah. To the point that he ended up threatening his own life. And I ended up having to put him in a psychiatric unit for a few days because of it. And that was the start of where I thought, okay, I can't do this anymore. And I was just only putting it on him though. He's completely fallen apart. He doesn't trust me. He thinks because I'm going to a meeting that I'm automatically, doing things with all these people. I just can't do this anymore. Something has to give. And I remember saying that statement, and something did have to give. And it wasn't that it wasn't kind of a bad situation in our marriage. It definitely was, but there was a lot me. It was a lot me, and I didn't even realize that it was until later. But when he got out, we tried to kind of work things out, but we were having a really hard time. I was having a hard time trusting him. I was having a hard time trusting him. He was having a hard time trusting me. And so we were at this kind of pass on things. And we went the rest of the year kind of in this limbo back and forth. And early 2019, I actually ended up taking a contract to consult a public company in New York City, which made me have to travel to New York every other week. And make a long story short, you can actually find this online, and this is a sad, terrible story of its own. But I ended up they made me temporary CEO of the company. I ended up finding fraud in the company and had to whistleblow on that, which again was more stress on my entire life. My entire life, so I'm having to deal with attorneys and trying to whistleblow on this company that I found fraud in, and my marriage is falling apart, and crap's going on with my kids, and I'm, I feel like I'm just like drowning in debt at this point, because the reason I took that job was because it was going to pay off my debt. Well, then I find fraud in the company. Guess what? They're not going to pay me, right? So then I just have all this more debt where I'm traveling back and forth all the time. So during that time, I was actually on my way back from finding all this stuff and figuring out that I was having a whistleblow. And my husband calls me with some of his, jealousy crap again. And finally I said, I am done. I can't do this. Because at that moment, this was my moment that I was about to break. And my whole life was crashing down, and he was doing his jealousy crap, and I didn't know what to say to him to make him think that yes, I was running all over the place and having to deal with stuff that had nothing to do with me wanting men. It had to do with me just trying to hold our life together. And I remember telling him, I am completely done. And that next day I filed for divorce, and I told him he had to leave, told him he had to move out, because in my head I was trying to salvage what was left of me. I was trying to salvage my kids. I was trying to salvage what I could salvage, and I couldn't control him. I remember thinking that statement in my head. Fast forward to like 3 weeks later, and I end up in another relationship. We're just in the middle of a divorce, barely. And I end up in another relationship, and this guy is talking about marriage, and he's talking about, and I can remember, like, it felt great for a few days because I had somebody saying nice things to me and not saying, where were you? All this stuff, right? And so it felt good. But again, I've latched on to somebody else very, very soon. And I remember I woke up one day in the middle of this, and I was so tired, and I was so stressed, and I didn't know what to do about anything. And I was so sad, and I was so angry. And I remember just laying there, and all the things that had literally ever happened just come washing over me. And I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to get up. And I just laid there, and I was so tired just of everything that I could barely cry, but tears were running down my face, but I couldn't even do anything, and I remember thinking, I don't know what I'm doing. Why have I latched onto this guy that I barely know? Why have I introduced him to my kids already? I mean, I did. I introduced him to my kids, which is like I would have never imagined that. Looking at it like backwards, I'm like, what the actual why? Like, why?
Right.
But in my mind, again, I've latched onto somebody else because I've got to have some
lifeline.
It was like, yeah. And that's what it was. And I remember, I ended up having to break things off with this guy, and, I tried to figure out what I needed to do. And the only thing that could come to me is that me and my husband needed to go to counseling. It wasn't to fix our relationship at that moment. It was just to be able to co-parent our kids, because again, I had drugged my kids through all of this crap accidentally. You know what I mean? It's not that I even meant to. And in retrospect, I'm like, how in the world could a loving, responsible mother even do those things? But I did, and so I kept thinking, I just need to be able to fix the kids, and we need to fix a relationship to be able to co-parent. We were still in the middle of divorce. We just need to be able to get along. We need to be able to heal ourselves. I knew he was having some major PTSD issues. And I didn't realize that's what I had at the time. I just knew that I needed to go to counseling at that moment.
Right.
So we ended up going to counseling just to kind of work on ourselves. And I ended up getting diagnosed with PTSD, from all the things that I've been through in my life. And I was diagnosed with codependency issues, which I didn't even know what word that was. But since then, I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that that's what that was. And it's funny because, I see that in other people too now, and I didn't see it before. Since then, my kids have been in counseling. I've been to lots of counseling. My husband's been to counseling. We did end up stopping the divorce. We were able to save our marriage. It was a miracle that we were able to save our marriage. Honestly, that's not the normal. And I always tell people, if you go into stuff like that with that much damage to save your marriage, it's probably not going to work. We went into it to just help ourselves, and we ended up being able to save our marriage. That was a bonus, because sometimes I don't think that it is the best idea to save it.
Right.
It's definitely kind of, to each their own type of thing.
Right.
But, we were able to figure out, like I said earlier, that during the times where we were both having these breakdowns, we were both having them. And unfortunately, the way that we break down is opposite and makes each other worse. So the more that he would try to, control me, or I felt like he was controlling me, ask me questions and accuse me, that would bring back all of the stuff from my past of nobody believing me when the stuff happened at, whenever I was 15, bringing back the fact that I felt like I wasn't in control. People used me for whatever they could. And, it brought back all those feelings. And I didn't realize that I was kind of roping that all together. I just knew that it felt bad and I couldn't deal with it. I wanted away from it. So unfortunately it was him. So I wanted away from him at that moment. So, and, he had not only been in the military, but, he had abandonment issues. He was diagnosed with a lot of abandonment issues. So obviously, whenever he felt that I was pulling away, he thought I was leaving him. Right. So unfortunately, the way he would react to that was he would try to grasp onto me. The more he would try to grasp on, the more I would try to pull away. So we were in this horrible battle, and we didn't even realize it. And it's funny now, kind of looking back, it feels like a lifetime ago, and it really wasn't that long ago. And it was because it was early 2019. But I can remember the moment that I literally just said, I'm letting all this go. I can't, if I save the business, fine. If I don't save the business, fine. If the building gets taken, whatever. I just knew I couldn't deal with stuff. And I laid it all down. I talk about this on my podcast too, that I explained that I felt like I was holding all these pieces together, and I was trying to wear this mask of perfection, that I had my life together, because I had a business and I needed to work with business owners, and I can't go in there like a freaking hot mess saying, yeah, I can take care of your business, So I was trying to hold all these pieces of perfection together. And when I couldn't anymore and I let them go, it was so freeing. It was so freeing. I wasn't afraid of that. I wasn't afraid. Like, I didn't even care anymore. And, I'm not saying you shouldn't care about anything, but the fact that I overly cared about everything, every second of every day, having that moment where I decided, I don't care. I don't care. All I care about is my kids and trying to heal myself, and whatever else happens. The moment that I decided that started my healing, honestly. But even before I went to counseling, that was the moment that started it. And counseling was a big deal for me because I never went to counseling because I didn't want to talk about my problems, and I didn't trust people. And I remember making these comments, what freaking good does it do to sit there and tell people your problems and have people think they know you and tell you what you should do? You know what I mean? I remember making those statements all the time. So even the idea of knowing that I needed, because it's hard. It is, it's if you've got trust issues, to be able to trust somebody
that you don't know.
Tell and there are counselors that's not going to be a fit for you. One of the counselors that I went to early on, me and my husband, we went to, she was super nice and I liked her as a person, but she made one statement.
Oh, wasn't she great? Too much goodness for one episode. I feel like she is so good at really pulling you into her story while still being able to see your story in hers. And I think she does a great job at this. So way too much to put into one episode. So Coming up next episode of Multiform PTSD.
I feel now that I'm actually so thankful. This sounds silly when I say this. I'm so thankful for all the crap that happened. Yes, I wish I had my grandparents back. It's not like, that, but I'm thankful
Right.
that I made the terrible decision of the consulting agreement in New York. I'm thankful that that was the catalyst of me saying that I was done with the relationship, because if not, I think our relationship would have continued in this, it wasn't that it was horrible all the time, but this
Toxic.
placating. We were just, it was a toxic placating type of environment of where, I just would try not to make him angry and he would try not to make me annoyed. And, it would kind of be one of these things, because I wouldn't say anything until I was so mad. And then when I was so mad, I'd say all the things,
Yeah.
And so it was just like, it was not a healthy environment. But if I hadn't got to the point where I couldn't hold, all the pieces together of my fake perfect life, if I hadn't got to that point, I think I'd still be in the same place of being able to put on my fake mask at work and, be who I needed to be for my clients. Because
Wait a second. Before you go, I just wanted to say thank you to the guests who come on here and join us and truly make this podcast what it is. I want to thank you for being here and for listening and for all of your messages that you send me. I truly read each and every one of them individually, and it keeps me going. So keep them coming. Thank you so much. I also wanted to let you know to go ahead and subscribe, like, comment this episode and any other episodes you may love what we do, where you can look at our services for a speaking engagement, or you really want to just work one-on-one with yours truly on some coaching programs and some free resources I've got for you. I am so excited about customized game plans for recovering from trauma or just heightening your general mental wellness. Don't worry, you don't have to like football and you don't have to understand it to really get this program going for you. Tell all your friends. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, MultiformPTSD. Also, email me at Tracy@MultiformPTSD.com. So thank you for being here. We'll see you next episode.